As they set off over the ridge down near Lake Albano, Laine realized they were moving towards ancient Alba Longa, and she followed behind Romulus. She was so psyched to be going to town, wondering what he was up to. They were climbing over the ridge leading to the lake when something made them stop in their tracks. She heard clattering from inside the roundhouse. Someone shouted, and Laine turned, thinking Lupina was going to stop them. But then she realized it was only one of the neighbors working hard in his field. And Lupina had most likely not yet returned from her night prowl. Laine realized she must have got lost in the trees and gone up the other side of the ridge when she first arrived there. But sure enough, there was the lake again. Lake Como, Montana, which had transformed into Lake Albano, Italy. Back in high school, she'd run the loop many times with her cross-country team. Romulus was running now, late like Laine often was to whatever he was trying to get to. It was hard to keep up with him on all fours. The trail was the same, except the paved part was not cobblestone, and there was no trailhead. This version of Laine, the Laine as a sheep, who couldn't keep up with Romulus, was Laine's lower self, the one that second-guessed herself and procrastinated. She couldn't wait until the time came when she'd become integrated with her higher self, with Romulus. This sheep form, she realized, was just her lower self trying to integrate with her higher self, and not yet being up to par. It was also like the feminine and masculine side of her personality were trying to merge. The feminine side, which was loving and creative, with the masculine side, which had the confidence and power to follow through on her convictions. When they were about an hour into the walk, they passed by the same spot Laine had last seen Jerry, but at that spot nothing happened, as she had expected, except a shiver ran down her spine. Curving around the lake's edge, it took the same amount of time it took Laine to walk from the start of the trailhead at Lake Como to the waterfall, which was about an hour and a half. When they got to where the waterfall was supposed to be, in its place she saw the stone embankment on which rose the ancient town of Alba Longa. It was a miracle. Magic did exist, and maybe she'd become more magical from all her trials. She thought back to all that she'd gone through, barely keeping it together, lost and confused often, but somehow she just kept going. Now this keyhole appeared to her dreams. She felt she was about to open it. It was incredible as they passed the place along the lake's edge. Fish drying on roofs, men carrying boats on the shore, cats licking their paws in the dusty sunshine, the sweat off a man's back as he hammered away at a rock wall, the women carrying water in clay pots, leaned into the shade of a tree to fan themselves. Soon the lake was behind them, on the opposite side instead of being out in front of them, and a road stretched towards the hills and the faint outline of a palace on the hill. She felt like this is what she was meant for, to write her dreams as they were finally coming true, summiting some destination within herself that was not fully realized. Romulus looked at Laine for the first time. He seemed on edge, and he squatted and hugged her close, and she understood how he felt, how his body and muscles were toned and strong, but tired. Same with his mind. His focus was steady, unshaken. She saw his eyes full of energy and intention, so much power and support around his fragile human body, which carried so much weight and still had many miles left to go. and realized how it was possible one could be struggling and thriving at the same time. She was surprised she didn't try to get away, usually knocked sideways at the threat of intimacy. It seems she usually rushed too quickly into things, shattering the natural flow, or avoided them altogether, afraid to be close to anyone, afraid to be pulled apart. But maybe things were changing, evening out. She was finally putting herself and her dreams first. She was safe. She was her higher self, and she couldn't run away from herself. Laine nudged her nose under Romulus's hand, feeling at home for the first time in a long time. They were stopped in the shade, and he drank from the canteen strapped to his side. "Wish me luck." "You're gonna put yourself out there," Laine wanted to say but couldn't. "That's really brave. Carpe diem." Hey, that's Latin. When Laine had first started her experimental blog, Modern Legend, she also had felt nervous. She even went by a pen name. They got to the road, past the waterfall, and the trees became the heavy, solid oaks that looked like the ones that lined Daly Mansion back home. There was a bridge with 3 culverts that looked from a distance like 3 gray circles from its position to the right. Between each tree was a potted plant, with a spherical hedge coming out from the long branch. She could see the top of the houses just peeking out. The trees were planted in intervals of equal spacing, giving meter to each of Romulus's sandaled steps. Huts like Romulus's were in the distance, but they were entering Alba Longa now. She saw more of the terraced houses sloping sideways up the hill as they passed over the bridge. The houses grew denser, more communal, and Laine could almost imagine how upgraded and cheered up with color they could be of the modern times. On the side leading to the palace, there were rudimentary versions of the huge Spanish houses with the big open courtyards in the middle, sometimes with potted plants and statues, but they were clumsier, built of stone, preparing for defense if the need should arise. The women and girls on the road wore stiff sashes to keep their hair up. They were beautiful but stiff, fanning themselves with stretched skins as thin as oak leaves on the stoops where they sat. Sometimes Romulus's eyes seemed to linger on one, but then he seemed to shake himself and continue to move forward. Laine wanted to rest her sore muscles in the hot baths of the mineral pools, where the men stepped from the steam, but she stuck next to Romulus. On the streets outside, Laine saw many tanned but also many pale people, depending on their rank. And back then, being pale was considered hot. She could tell the laborers from the gentry. She peered into the courtyard, which contained a fountain, swarmed by birds and fish that looked like koi inside. Laine dunked her head inside to see many ancient coins and cooled herself off. The ground was alive with feathers. All was chaos and splendor. People and animals forming ellipses with children chasing each other. Romulus tugged her on, and Laine noticed the tapestries covering nearly every entrance showed a man aiming a bow and arrow at a lone wolf. She knew Remus was behind it. She didn't like what Remus was doing to get ahead. He was accentuating the fear that already existed between the two races. The wolf people were the ones who settled in Alba Longa from the north. They had darker hair and eyebrows, and many feared an uprising and a loss of power, while the discrimination for these people grew. Their features seemed to grow more in line with those of animals, which was a cruel and humiliating way of demystifying them. "It's time," Romulus said, tugging on her rope, as they stepped into the thoroughfare. Oxen moved in and out in long rows. She almost got trampled by them, easily startled and anxious as she was. When Romulus pulled the rope that led her on, some ladies giggled at the ungainly duo, but Romulus seemed unaffected and led her out into an alleyway where the plaza was. Many villagers were gathered talking. Their words swarmed round like mosquitoes over a carcass. Laine wondered if this was a public forum. From what she'd read, usually places like funerals were great places for aspiring politicians to stand out and gain followers. Like much later, Julius Caesar would make his Aunt Julia speech that helped launch his political career. Romulus was stepping up to present his work, she realized, the first in the queue. Or was he the last? Laine could tell it was his first time speaking publicly. There was something so poetic about his look. New life rocketing from the ashes. Though Laine knew Romulus's intent wasn't to be a leader at all. All he wanted to do was imagine and write and create beautiful things. But what was to happen when his imaginings became real? He was called to be a leader, yet how did the saying go? The great men are full of insecurity, while those that appear great are full of recklessness. Something like that. Romulus wasn't expecting his brother's prominence once he got to town. He was touting about the prophecy, and signs littered the street of the babies raised by the she-wolf, which was their emblem. Remus made it out to seem that he was the chosen one. Romulus stood on the dais when it was his turn to speak. How vulnerable and exposed he looked, standing there, an unknown shepherd boy, where she was his only supporter. What if pain came to him, and there was nothing Laine could do but watch? What if she was in trouble and could not wake herself out of this crazy dream? If only she could just pinch herself, maybe she'd wake up. She tried to pinch herself. Of course that didn't work. She started pacing, but realized she needed to stay strong for him and for herself. So she stood still and remembered her breathing exercise. "I feel safe in this space," she said. "I feel safe in this body." Eventually she calmed down a bit. She began asking the questions again. Where does the body go when the spirit leaves it? Where do we go when we die? However, the questions grew more internal. Who am I? Do I like coffee or tea? Romulus and Laine hadn't heard any of the other speeches. "Go on, boy," a man prompted, jabbing him with his cane. It was his turn to speak, apparently, and he took it, stepping forward. Thanks for watching my video, guys. I'll be back with another video next Wednesday. Until then, ciao!